Hello, and welcome to Oh, Jesus Christ, Chris.
Sorry.
Keep this in, David. Keep this in.
No, please don't keep it in.
Keep it in.
I feel so
Hello,
bad.
and welcome to Mangasplaining, the show where we recommend great manga to folks who haven't read much manga before. Hosted by Debeoke, David Brothers, some guy named Chris, and myself, Chip Zdarsky. Follow along with our show notes and reading list at mangasplaining.com. So obviously I'm hosting, which is rare. I think I've only hosted 3 times before this, maybe 4. We're revisiting a book I quite enjoyed in a previous season. So this one is going to be Even Though We're Adults, Volume 2 by Takako Shimura. And it continues the story of Ayano and Shuri, 2 women who are falling for each other, despite one being married to a man?
Dun, dun, dun.
This volume goes into the aftermath of Ayano telling her husband about the forbidden kiss and the complications that arise with his family, of all things. So yeah, I love Volume 1, and it's so rare we kind of go on to other volumes. And I was really looking forward to this, and I read it, and I enjoyed it. All right, so that's been Mangasplaining.
Really, what more needs to be said?
Yeah, what more needs to be said? So I'm going to put it out to you. How does Volume 2 stack up to Volume 1? And I'm going to pick Chris first because he so rudely interrupted my opening.
I'm so glad you picked me first, actually, because
good.
I don't know if you remember back to the episode, but I was like, I actually just want to read. I think this was behind the scenes. I actually really wanted to read Even Though We're Adults, Volume 2, but I don't make time to read anything unless we're putting it on the podcast lately.
Yeah, fair.
So we're going to have to cover some American comics at some point so I can catch up. But yeah, so I'm glad. I have some real mixed thoughts about this volume, actually. And it's not that it's not good. It's still like a really good book, I think. But I don't want to take up all the air here, but I will say that a thing that I liked that I keep going back to when I think about this property is something that David said on the first episode. And it was that there's a poetry to how their relationship sort of came together, scenes sort of cut together, some like real art to like the two of them sort of falling for each other. That was, I thought, really amazing. And that was actually something that really resonated with me for the first volume. And this volume is a lot more grounded in the everyday, in like, I think more than doubles the cast of speaking characters. It introduces a bunch of sort of mundane situations and circumstances to let this forbidden love affair bounce off of. And at its core, this story, I was really interested in the relationship of the 2 women and how it sort of played out, like how it played off with her husband, who was a really interesting character. And I was less interested in sort of like the teacher stuff or, whatever. And then we just get more of everything. We get more of everything this volume, but it was really weighted towards the sort of larger world that these characters inhabit. And it's probably really good narrative building and story building, but it was the poetry, which is not necessarily narrative. It's, it's poetry that I was most in love with in the first volume. And so I had a kind of a mixed reaction.
It's interesting. Yeah, I get there is an elegance to the first volume because of the focus on the 2 characters. And here you kind of, it's hard to make to make this American comic example. It's hard to make a team book elegant. An X-Men page doesn't look as elegant as a Batman page.
You're absolutely right.
There's too much going on. There are a few instances in here that are still quite lovely in terms of the art, but I think the first one was more artful. And I get what you're saying about all the characters kind of derail that kind of that love story. And my first read through, I think I agreed with you, but I felt like I missed a lot reading it in one go that I actually had to go back and reread it. And then I enjoyed it a lot more the second time because once I kind of knew the characters, it just kind of, it added to the narrative for me.
So interesting to hear.
Yeah, I'm super smart.
It's true.
Deb, what did you think of Volume 2?
It had been a while since I read Volume 1 and even Volume 2. Like, I'm a binge reader, so after we read I just read whatever was available. But this is the first time I've revisited this volume in a couple months. It's really interesting how understated it is. There's a lot of drama going on, but the husband is not necessarily a cut and dried bad person who's getting in the way of their love. The mother-in-law is not a cut and dried, why don't you guys have children? And, do this kind of thing. And how she takes the news of, oh, you had an affair and it was just a kiss and, all that kind of thing. And then like later on, it's like finding out that this wasn't her only crush or female friendship, more than friends relationship. So there's all kinds of little nuances that got introduced into this story that, you could say it clutters it up. I mean, sometimes some of the characters that I introduced, like the shut-in sister, I was like, wait, where's this going with this?
Yeah.
But, at the same time, I've been watching maybe too much Korean dramas.
No such thing.
And just like reading through this is like, oh, this is really dialed back. Because, it's so, there's not a lot of yelling. There's a lot of maybe passive aggressiveness.
Oh, yeah, a lot.
But not a lot of yelling and not a lot of crying.
Yeah.
It's kind of like there's a battle going on, but it's on a different level.
Mm-hmm.
It's a battle of wills going on a completely different level. Like the husband, like he says, I won't give you a divorce. And it's like, but why?
Yeah.
Oh, because divorce I want to talk about that.
Oh yeah. No, that's a whole nother thing,
yeah.
right? So, and then it's like, and she's not sure what to do with it. So I guess when I first read volume 1, I thought, oh, this is going to be over 3 volumes, And when you get a taste of volume 2, you realize, oh, it's actually not.
Yeah.
Yeah. David, what did you think?
I have 2 takes. Do you want the emotional one or the slightly ridiculous comparison that's actually going to be very apt?
Very apt. Well,
why do we have to choose?
Yeah,
I want peanut butter and chocolate.
We'll start with the craft and work our way into oversharing on the internet.
All right, I love it.
So I love, like, violence comics are my favorite genre. And this is very much not that. But there's like a melodrama to violence comics that I like a lot that I don't like in my like drama comics, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Like, I'm not really into soap opera, but I'll watch a movie about like a messed up family or dysfunctional family just to see how it plays out. And this is like a Garth Ennis and Steve Dillon romance comic almost, with the density, right? With the density of the talking heads, like all the different angles each character approaches from, and also like how smoothly it reads. Jocelyn Allen, friend of the podcast, and Casey Lucas are credited with translation and adaptation. And there are a lot of points where I was like, oh, this is good localization. Maybe like slightly Canadian, but like very smooth.
Wait, you have to stop there.
Yeah.
How is it slightly Canadian?
It may just be me like being from the South, but like we don't, or maybe just from my family or whatever. But like I feel like supper is like a slightly Canadian thing.
Supper is a Canadian thing
versus dinner. Yeah. Not that people in America don't say supper, but it does feel like a very regional thing to me. And because I know Jocelyn's from Canada, I'm like, oh, it's probably that versus, just her being good at writing.
Supper, I mean, yeah, we use it a lot in Canada. Supper, to me, always felt like a southern U.S. thing. Like, we're going for supper.
I think there's that, but that's like a fancy dinner.
That's because supper is
fancy
East Coast.
Even that voice you did is like a fancy southerner.
Yeah, no, obviously, any voice I do is immediately fancy. You know that.
Wait, the Hawaii girl needs to know, what's the difference between supper and dinner?
I would say supper feels like slightly more upper class, but in reality, probably nothing.
Well, if I may, it's actually it's Acadian. It's from the East Coast, and so obviously it goes into the East Coast of Canada, but also down into like Louisiana, like the Acadians of Louisiana. And supper's an extra meal. Supper's like the second nighttime meal. It's like 11sies, like with the hobbits and shit. It's like basically if you're going to get up first thing in the morning to go fish, like 'cause that's what you do on the East Coast. You actually have dinner right before you have supper. Sorry, you have supper right before, or supper is the early one and dinner is the late one. It's one of the two. I'll put it in the show notes. But you have a second meal right before you go to bed, and then you get up in the morning and immediately go out fishing, and you have breakfast when you get back from fishing. It's like a like agricultural world. So it's like a second dinner.
Amazing.
But because people obviously travel and immigrate all over the country, the words have kind of become interchangeable as just evening meal.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Well,
that's usually a bag of potato chips for me.
That's breakfast for me. So yeah.
Well, thank you for joining us for meal-splaining.
Sorry.
With my
David,
weird
you had
hangouts.
David, you had a second into this?
Yeah, the Innes Dillon thing is it's people like having great conversations in various settings, a lot of which are bars actually, which is like an Innes Dillon staple, and they're all kind of being very honest but not very open in a lot of ways. So there's some jousting in here that I liked a lot.
If I may, for those who don't know, Ennis Dillon is Garth Ennis and Steve Dillon, a comics pair best known for their work on Hellblazer and Preacher in the comics industry. So the late Steve Dillon, who was great, Garth Ennis works with a lot of wonderful artists doing stuff. Yeah, check out their work. I think we all rate it pretty highly, except for maybe Deb, who maybe hasn't read any of it.
Ennis is kind of like my top tier comics dialogue guy. You know, I feel like he has an amazing ear for dialogue. But the other angle is emotional. Like, you know, we talked a lot on the previous episode about our various dating histories and proclivities. Proclivities has got to be the wrong word. It sounds horrible.
It probably sounds classier than it needs to be, based on what you're describing.
Or worse. But so a lot of this book is how do you respond to the dilemmas the characters are going through, like based on our own, you know, history and like what we want out of relationships. And I think I said that I hope somehow they end up in some kind of like polyamorous triad. And that's still true, but I loved getting to see all of their family involved and how difficult that can make a relationship. Because something I mentioned before the podcast was I watched Neil Brennan's latest Netflix special, Blocks. And he has a bit 30 or 40 minutes into it, one of several that ruined me, where he talks about how much of relationships are luck. You know, he says, like, you've got like a 1 in 8 chance of marrying someone you're dating. The marriage has a 50% chance of working out. 50-50 chance of working out. You can't do it 50%. And that means it's functionally like if you're great and your partner's great, that's like a 6% chance of having a loving, lasting relationship. So it's luck. Like, dating is really hard and really difficult. And this does a good job of showing, like, not just the luck, but also the difficulty that comes from that. Like when the younger girl, in the flashback scene, there's a bit where we see the main character in high school, and she's like, you know, like, I wish you had been born, or I wish you were a boy. Or, you know, it's kind of unlucky that she's a girl instead of a boy. There's all these little moments where it could have gone another way. And it keeps making it even more, not compelling. I mean, yes, compelling, but like, I feel bad for everybody involved in different ways. And I was glad that the one lady got to say, like, I'm the victim here, but everyone keeps coming to my job and making things weird.
That was such a good moment.
Oh, yeah. That was good.
So I think having like a year's worth of thinking about relationships since we last read this, and then also like very recently seeing that Neil Brennan thing, like, I'm still rooting for everybody. And I can see why someone would feel that this kind of derails it by introducing all these other people. But like, no relationship is an island. At least hopefully not. You know, like, you have friends, you have relations and coworkers, acquaintances that have to kind of factor into all this. So I think that Shimura is doing an amazing job of kind of painting a picture of this really complicated situation without making anyone come across like a villain.
I agree with that. I don't think anyone, the mom actually does not.
Does she come across as a mom or a villain?
Yeah,
it's pretty borderline actually at points, because it's not even like she's putting her own needs, she's forefronting her own needs and desires at the expense of not only her children, one of whom became a shut-in because of something that we haven't discovered yet, but like, it's not villainous necessarily, but it's kind of shitty behavior. Like, it's not just mom behavior. Like, it's like, well, you should move in with us, and because your father's going to be sick, and so it's like, you've already got 2 kids living with you. Why do you need your son to come home and take care of your dad as well? And it's just like, and who cares if you kissed a girl? It's not a big deal. You're still going to stay married, and you're still going to do this. And it's like, maybe they need to figure some stuff out. Like, she's not played as like, sorry, there's obviously mom stuff there too, but there's also like, she is not, I don't think Shimura is being kind to her as a character, let's say. And I think that that's really interesting.
But doesn't that give you insight to the husband and his actions?
You mean, oh, sorry, like her husband? Why he's in the hospital? Because it's her? Yeah.
No. No, I'm joking. The way that the mother is acting and her attitude is echoed and must trickle down into Wataru somehow.
Yeah, right? Absolutely. It's such a weird,
which helps give some background or some, like, even if it's subtle, some kind of aha moment, like, oh, that's why he's like that. That's why
Yeah.
he's reacting like that, right? And not in a super obvious way, but kind of like, oh, okay, this doesn't come out of nowhere.
Yeah, I feel like, I mean, it felt very contrived to kind of put Ayano into this situation with all the family
Yeah.
on the eve of her wanting a divorce. But it highlighted how different her character is from the family, because the family is all passive aggressive, and Ayano is just passive. Ayano is just kind of floating through all these situations, not making too many decisions. Even in the flashback with her friend, wanting their special hugs or whatever, it's like Ayano's just like, oh, this is happening. Like
That's
it's
true,
always
yeah.
just kind of like that as she's trying to figure out internally what's going on, but rarely is it external. And so her being thrown into this situation where there's all this weird kind of sniping happening underneath, I thought was a really interesting way to kind of highlight her character and how she's just kind of like she's in the middle of everything and she's a catalyst, but she's not doing a lot. Like she said that they should get divorced and he said no, and she just kind of kept going on. Like she wasn't even like really broken up about that. It's just like, okay, I'm moving in with the family.
Counterpoint, we are introduced to Ayano's family as well. So it's not like, oh, all families are weird and awful. It's not like Wataru's family and Wataru's mom is like terrible. We're actually introduced to Ayano's family as a counterpoint to show that like, oh, that's really weird. And it's like, and then Ayano's sister finds out that she like cheated, and that is, I got a whole thing about that. But like, and it's like, oh, but like, they're still forcing you to move in. That's weird, actually. Like, that's super weird. And we all get to feel that is super weird as well. But it's, I don't know, something that's maybe more common.
Is it forcing?
Do you feel like she had an option?
I don't think
it's a choice.
Info. Yeah.
Do you feel like her and Wataru could have said no?
I think moving after requesting a divorce is like the wildest possible decision you could make. It's like, let's do a really annoying thing together. But I think that it reflects how complicated the relationship is getting. Because she doesn't have to. I'm trying to think of a way to say this. It's not like she doesn't have to stay there, but she's choosing to stay there.
Yeah, and that's,
I think some of that's the wishy-washiness that you were mentioning, but I think also she's comfortable there. Like there's something to this situation that she benefits from or she gets something out of. And I thought it was interesting the way that she cut through a lot of the drama of Wataru's family when she's like, oh, I'll ask the shut-in to go visit their sick dad with me, who I haven't seen in like 5 years. And that's the best possible decision for me to make right now. And it works. Like her husband is like, oh, I don't know. I don't know if I want to hang out with my actual sister. But she kind of goes for it. I think because of her experience with her own sister. So I agree she's very passive. But I think that there are certain ways in that she's not, and other ways that she's kind of hemmed in by her relationship. By her situation, I would say more so than the relationship. Like when she goes and visits the lady on the break when her husband's in the restaurant, like she gets in a taxi. Yeah. And it's clearly something they discuss, and they're like, okay, you have to do this. You should go and do it, and then we can talk about it after. Like that's like a hella mature, emotional relationship move. Very difficult. I don't know.
I'm flipping through this, and I'm noticing that Wataru just doesn't make any advances on his wife, like doesn't treat her with any affection. But I mean, or jokes with her or whatever. It just seems like of course he's angry, right? And of course he's being standoffish, but it's like, I'm not exactly sure why. I don't know. It's just a really weird dynamic, isn't it? Because she just kind of goes through her life, this like whatever comes. But now that she has this relationship and this, all of a sudden this excitement, she's forced to ask herself, is this something I want to fight for?
And she doesn't.
But then she regrets it. And then, of course, Shimura, like if you read to the end of volume 2, there's like, oh, and guess what? She's going to move in next door.
Yeah, one of the funniest to be continued I've ever seen in my life.
I saw that to be continued, and it actually soured that part of the book even more for me, because it was like, oh, it's going to be a little wacky, and I don't want it to be wacky. I want it to be like two beautiful ladies in like, hiding in an alley, kissing and discovering each other. I don't want it to be like, and now she, like the lesbian moved in next door and we're all going to live together. Like, I would love to have them have like a polyamorous relationship, like you were saying, like that would be the best possible outcome. But I don't think moving next to Wataru's mom is going to be how that works. I don't see her coming on board with that.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of goes with what's happened in the volume, because like moving in with the husband's family is also kind of the wacky scenario where like things are going to stem from. I was going to say for Wataru, the husband, I was fascinated by the fact that like through this whole volume, he is drawn almost always with a dead stare. Like he is just dead throughout this. And the scene after Ayano talks to Shuri and they're in the restaurant and he's just looking at his phone. She goes like, "Thanks for letting me go talk to her." He's not even looking at it. He goes, "It's fine. If she tried to kill herself or something, I'd have trouble sleeping at night." Ooh. But he's not even like, he's not engaging with her at all. Like this is just like, yeah, like I had sympathy for him in volume 1, and that sympathy kind of drained in volume 2. I mean, not fully though, because once you see his family and especially his mother, you're just like, oh, okay, I get it.
But the way he treats his shut-in sister, who he apparently has not made efforts, or we haven't seen efforts like for them to reconcile, where he's like, yeah, I wouldn't know what to say to her. It's been a couple of years. It's like, it's your sister, dude.
Yeah.
Like, I lost a lot of sympathy for him as a character in that scene, in that moment. And it's whatever. People have complicated family stuff, and I don't want to get away, but this is fiction also. And like, we are meant to take something from that. Like, for whatever reason, Aries got a lot of stuff going, or the shut-in sister has like a lot of stuff going on. And like, he's like, yeah, I wouldn't know how to talk to her about that. So like,
yeah, I just kind of saw that as being like, oh, something is going to be explained at some point as to why he said that. Yeah.
I read that as distress more so than disinterest. I'm trying to flip back to the page now. It's
like shock comics, or
almost like he had the impending divorce, yes or no, on his mind, and not reconciling or like living with his sister necessarily. Like he was caught by surprise and maybe overwhelmed a little bit.
I mean, that's the worst thing you could do, right? I mean, if they're having problems, they should have the privacy to work it out.
Yeah, the moving in, such a bad decision.
Such a bad decision.
Yeah, okay, page 112 is when he says, you know, I'm good, I'll visit our father on my own. I wouldn't know what to say to Eri after all this time. And he's kind of blushing and sweating a little bit. And it feels like really guilty to me. Like there's definitely something that has to be explained there.
Well, yeah, because in the next page, he's thinking, shoot, did she hear me talking about her?
Yeah.
Like it's like there's kind of more concern there than he has for the situation he's in with his wife.
There is, yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, this is a fascinating volume. Like I said, like I needed to do the second read through because the first one I kind of bounced off it a little bit, but like going through it again, there's a lot of layers to the relationships and the characters, and so I'm kind of glad in hindsight that the actual kind of the love story aspect slowed down to a crawl to kind of allow for all this to come in.
Yeah,
I haven't read volume 3. I know Deb has. David owns it.
Working on it. I might save it for the next episode.
Yeah. So I feel like it's got to kind of ramp up a lot in volume 3. But yeah, I guess we'll see when I recommend we read more next season.
Maybe this will be our new Akira.
I mean, this is our new BL Metamorphosis.
Right? Oh, yeah.
BL Metamorphosis, yeah.
I love this as like counter to Akira.
It really is in a lot of ways. I was thinking while I was reading this, I was like, this is kind of for grown-ups in a way that Akira isn't. You know?
Yeah.
In terms of the subject matter, what it's going for.
The in-laws' household is about to explode.
Yeah. Like, I can't imagine picking this up without having, like, adult experience and getting much out of it. Like, it's cute, it's funny, it's well drawn. But there's so much of this where I'm like, oh, this is like real life in ways that I'm not entirely happy with, but I'm glad to see on the page, you know?
Yeah.
Also, it's really funny. There are so many bits where I, like, laughed out loud.
Really? Like, which one?
When she falls asleep on her bed and right before dinner, when Ayano does, and then Eri goes to wake her up, and there's a drawing of her face, and she has like the dumbest face on.
Oh yeah,
She's sleeping with her eyes open.
Yeah, I screen grabbed that one immediately.
Yeah, when the sister goes to the restaurant and it says, "Hey, do you know Ayano Okubo?" And there's the pause, and then there's the full face blush, and like her eyes go white. Yeah, love that effect too.
There's also a bit of internal dialogue for Shuri that both loved and was funny and also very insightful into my life. which was I've mistaken regular ass horniness for the cosmic pull of destiny before.
I love, yes, she's so
I always
good.
ended up worse off for it. Like, oh yeah, no, I get that.
And that led to another thing I thought was really funny, or maybe it was just before when she accidentally calls her. Like, she's like, should I block this number or delete her?
Oh yeah.
And then she's like, hello? Like, love it. Speaking as
Yeah.
a guy who sent an email to the wrong person, talking about a second person. Yeah, I've been there.
Mhm.
Oh, wow.
Way funnier when it happens to other people.
Yeah.
Whoa.
I actually I want to go back to something you said that this is for grown-ups, and I think this is maybe, I don't remember because it's been 40 episodes or something, but I think that's maybe why I recommended this to Chip originally, so I wanted to read it. But he was talking about how we'd been reading a lot of books that were like kind of shonen and shoujo and stuff, and it was like, here's a book that's like legit for grown-ups about grown-up things and grown-up problems. And I think maybe one of the why I didn't put this together until just now, and this is the joy of doing the podcast with you guys, is that the art that I felt was missing from this volume was actually there, but it was in the flashback sequence where she's a teenager and she's finding like the first girl that ever confessed sort of her feelings to her. And it is really well done and artsy and poetic in the ways that I wanted, and has that same kind of vibe as the first volume. But I'm just so much more used to that kind of thing happening in like Yuri manga or even yaoi manga, like when it's about teenagers, because it's always about like those first romantic feelings, those first crushes, those first experiences, which is like, fine, those books got to exist. Every kid needs to see themselves reflected in a book, especially gay kids. And it's just, I'm 45 and I've read it all before so many times that it didn't resonate the way that the two adult ladies getting into an adult relationship for the first time did in the first volume. And looking back at it, just scanning while we've been talking here, it's like, yeah, it's exactly the same kind of storytelling that we found in the first volume, except it's about these two characters. And it is, I will say it's less immediate because it's in flashback. And I liked the immediacy of their relationship, even when we were learning things like they cut out in the middle of like their first meeting and then we go back to it a little bit later. And, that's a cool narrative technique. And it is less immediate because it's like remembering something that happened a long time ago. But there is art to this. And yeah, I think maybe Chip's right. I think maybe a second read through would maybe improve that, and it would feel more like for grown-ups. But I want the grown-up stuff, and even if it comes with like messy family shit, but I want the fun grown-up stuff. I want the like going to bars and meeting people grown-up stuff, not the having to deal with your mother-in-law trying to prevent you from getting a divorce grown-up stuff. Maybe that's just what I want in my manga. So
on page 152 in that flashback, there's I guess their second or third embrace in like the trench coat with the turtleneck sweater. And that feels like such a mature angle on like a younger fantasy.
yeah,
Because like she's clearly not into it, but like she's sort of relenting in a way that you can tell she cares, but she doesn't care the same way as the other person.
Yeah.
Which is a horrible place to be in a relationship. Like on either side, I would say.
It really is.
I'm just flipping through the pages, and what I'm admiring is the very clear through line she makes for each panel. Like going from the panel to panel to panel, the way the characters are positioned, the way the word balloons are positioned. It reads very smoothly and seamlessly.
Oh, I thought of Cross Game while I was reading this. Actually, I read Cross Game after the first volume of this, but I think they have very similar storytelling.
Yeah, I can see that. One of my favorite pages from this is the husband's little sister, Ari. Page 36, when she's waking up. And so it's just a really nice scene setting shot, and then just like the slowly kind of starting the day on your own. But the fact that the final panel is just that little foot just poking out of the frame to go into whatever kind of mess the house is going to be in is a really beautiful little touch.
Yeah, definitely.
Yep.
And I love the facing page with the cursing in the word balloon. Where it's just like a scrawl of something and a exclamation point, and what is it? Interrobang is a question mark exclamation point?
Yeah.
Like on 42, where there's that weird angle where the mother is in the doorway. Like that's not an obvious choice for how to frame that panel.
Oh, like a worm's eye view there.
Yeah.
Very clever.
Yeah. There's some smart stuff.
There's a lot of really subtle craftsmanship going on here that you don't appreciate on first read.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. I think it's as good as Volume 1. The more I look at it, the more I think about it, the more I'm just like, oh, it's actually equal to that opening volume.
Yeah, I like the sister Kaede, the younger
Kaede?
sister who'd been through some stuff.
Yeah, she was great.
Yeah.
I think maybe the most dickish thing Wataru has done is send her to the bar as kind of a
Yes.
lark.
Mm.
Yeah.
Man, that was not a good move. But
But
she's
that,
so
that weird
cool.
dead face he makes when he says, go get revenge, it's like, what?
Yeah.
I think that was a joke, but I think you can't tell that kind of joke with a dead face.
Mm.
Like there's something going on there because like he does appreciate her.
He's
But anyway,
disassociating. That's
maybe
actually
that's
what
it,
I'm
yeah.
getting from the dead face stuff and that you guys are talking about. It's just like
Mm.
he is just like things that have happened out of my control, so I give up. Like I'm just gonna like he's like a little bit like a zombie, but also just like, oh, if you want to meet her, she works at this bar. And
Yeah.
it's played a little bit like subtle and like kind of dickish, but it's like if you just read it, it's like, well, if you want to know who that person is, they're here. Their last name starts with H. But I'm
Yeah.
not. It's because he's. It does feel like it's not his story to tell.
Mm.
I don't know. I have a lot of sympathy for him in the abstract. His just behavior of this volume was like kind of shit.
The making
Sorry.
it a puzzle is the worst part for me. That's the part where I'm like, okay, that's kind of like the dickest part of the movie.
Yeah. For
Yeah,
sure.
I mean, he wants others to be as shocked and taken aback as he was. That's
Yeah.
the thing. Like he's setting that in motion so everyone can experience it the way he experienced it, and also like, yeah, it's a swipe at her. It's a swipe at his wife for sure
Yeah.
because he knows it's going to come back to her, and she's going to find out that he did it too. Like there's no way of hiding that because the sister is obviously going to say, yeah, like he sent me there. Yeah, some real weird mind games going on from him, just kind of reacting the only way he knows how, the way his like mother probably taught him. And
Yeah.
now that he's regressing even more because he's back living with her, like, yeah, there's a lot going on here.
Oh, and maybe that's why Ayako and Eri have such like an easy like meeting or relationship in comparison.
Yeah.
Because she wasn't there for all the guilt and stuff that's holding him down. She just knows there's a distance. So her thought is heal this distance the way, my younger sister did.
Yeah.
But I love the part where she said she didn't tell Eri all about her sister's problem, like the messy parts. And the sister was like, whatever, it's fine. I lived through it. It's real life. That felt like such a ripped from reality type, bit of dialogue. So I feel like everyone I know who's been through a lot of, not everyone, obviously, but people who are comfortable sharing things like that are always really comfortable sharing it, if they feel it'll help or if they feel it'll be needed perspective. But they also recognize that everyone's situation is different, so that what worked for them might not work for others. And I felt that push and pull in their conversation. It was really pleasant. I don't know. I'm into it.
I want to ask you guys, because this is a book that was written that features female main characters written by a woman. Do you feel like the men were depicted in an unrealistic way or an unsympathetic way? Or did it resonate truthfully with you or people?
Well, there's only really one man.
Yeah.
Wataru, right? Yeah.
Wataru, because the dad's in a hospital. Yeah.
Yeah.
That part's realistic.
Yeah.
I think it does make me want to see myself, or maybe, what am I trying to say? I think I do look for aspects of him that reflect myself more often in that sense, which is probably why I feel like charitable towards some of the things that he's doing, even though I can admit like that they're not great, let's say. But it feels like a realistic reaction to kind of everything that you've been working towards as a team maybe going away, and maybe the team wasn't as strong as you thought it was, or something like that.
Yeah. That's I think the dad, there's not a lot of men in this book right now, and I think that's not like I kind of didn't actually notice that until you just asked.
Yeah, same.
I think the dad's off the board right now specifically so that they can introduce him later and he can be a problematizing figure. And I think they'll keep him sick and in his bedroom as long as they need to until it gets to the next part of the story when it's like, all right, we need a new obstacle. Let's introduce the dad.
It's exactly like Logan Roy in Succession.
Maybe. I still haven't watched it. Yeah. Okay. Akari is the one that I feel maybe the most out of everything, because it's like, who hasn't ended up with someone who was curious about something and then ended up actually I'm really straight in a relationship, and I don't know how I feel about all this. And it's like, oh my god, when she was just like, how am I the villain? Like, a straight married lady hit on me, and now everyone's coming to my work to see who I am that's wrecking this home. And it's like,
yeah.
oh, dude, she was the most sympathetic to me, like way more than Wataru. Like, I saw myself more in that, and I think it's maybe more experiential, and just that she's like an out gay person, which is also not super easy. Not super easy anywhere, but definitely not super easy in Japan after the last couple weeks. So I don't know. I kind of don't. Yeah, I don't know.
I noticed two things while you were talking that were related to Deb's question, what you were saying. The Deb's bit is easier. So there is one other guy in this book, and it's the guy who declares his love to Akari after she's like, "Oh, I just need to get another lover." And
Oh,
it's
yeah.
it's basically the Wave Listen to Me guy who.
Yeah,
yeah.
The same restaurant. yeah, that's so good.
She's like, "No, I'm sorry, never mind. No, thank you." And then she's like, I'm pretty hot after that, which is great.
yeah.
Which I loved.
That was great.
But you were talking about kind of her living like kind of out and this complicating her life. I just realized she's wearing the same outfit when she calls Ayano that Ayano was wearing in the flashback that her friend asked her to wear to the carnival.
Yeah, to have that like
trench coat. Yeah.
Oh.
So there's like so much good stuff in this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Shimura Sensei is there's like I don't know. Shimura Sensei is like if you read the comments on our last episode, Erica kind of gets into it a little bit with the special article she wrote for us, Erica Friedman, who's a writer on many things, but Yuri manga in particular. And Shimura Sensei isn't really forthcoming about her own sexuality, and she doesn't have to be. It's particularly difficult for people in Japan to do so and to maintain different kinds of things. But she talks a lot about queer issues in the queer community and being a lesbian. So, like, whatever, we can all draw our conclusions. And this, I mean, it feels like so much like either she's got nothing but lesbian friends to pull stories from, you know what I mean? Or this is lived experience, like little things like dress up like a. And it gets into the high school prince situation that we've talked about a lot on this as well.
Yes.
I think we talked about it first in what was the book?
Nozaki-kun.
Nozaki-kun, yeah.
Oh yeah.
It's like, yeah, the like beautiful girl that all the other girls are in love with in school, except they're in a mixed school there. But yeah, like it gets into that trope, and it being 20 years ago, how that was even more of a trope then. And there's just a lot, but then it's like, what does this look like in a real day-to-day life kind of a way? And it's like, yeah, someone dresses a little bit like butch femme kind of a situation, trench coat, shorter hair, whatever, but still like got like femme markers. And it's the fact that this is in the manga and it's all coded just in the art because she's both writer and artist, so she doesn't have to spell that out. She's like, oh, I'm like, obviously this closeted teen lesbian girl is like, I want you to wear this specific thing. And then she does, and she looks great. That's like a thing, right? Like she's seen this in fashion magazines. She's seen this probably in manga that she's read. She's seen this probably in like illicit gay things that she is like hiding from her parents under her bed. And she's trying to live this portion of her life. And I mean, Ayano just doesn't get it because she's literally never considered the idea. Like she just hasn't thought about it at all. And for this other girl, you know, hugging her sadly every time, knowing that Ayano doesn't get it and doesn't reciprocate her feelings, like really good. And it's all coded and it's all in there. And some of it's explicit and some of it's not. But the fact is that like you don't do that by accident. Like you either have literally the best research in the world or this is something that you felt. And I think regardless, and I'm not trying to in or out Shimura Sensei, it feels really real. Mm-hmm. That part of it feels really real. And that is, again, like all my problems that I've listed with not liking this one as much as the first one, I still want to keep reading it. Like it's actually so good because the character stuff is really, really good. And the wacky sitcom situations that we keep finding ourselves in, I don't care about. But the execution is just so bang on, you know? Like I want to find out what happens to these people next. And not in a Wikipedia way like that other book. I actually want to read the stories because the execution's so good.
It's funny. It's the danger of introducing multiple characters with their own storylines. It's like the chances of hitting the reader equally with all of those is so low. Like you're going to be more invested in one or the other. Like, you know, shout outs. I just finished watching White Lotus season 2. Very good. But it follows like various couples and people. I'm just like, there are stories I'm more interested in than others. So when other characters popped up on screen, I'm like, oh yeah, okay, I'll follow them for a bit, but they're still not the main one. If the story was just about them, I'd probably actually be into it, but because there's so much more interesting stuff happening elsewhere, it always feels like, okay, yeah, I just kind of want to get by this part to get to the stuff that I do like. So it's a bit of a tricky thing as any kind of author introducing kind of multiple character arcs, because you might alienate your reader from at least one of them.
Yeah. And then now growing up to have a shotgun wedding was another thing where you're like, oh, like a lot's changed between high school and now. Like a lot of things are going down.
Yeah.
You mentioned like the best research ever. The thing with the hugs and where she's like, she could tell that I wasn't into it and she just stopped. Like being in a relationship where like the hugs changed tenor was totally a real thing.
Yeah.
So I was amazed to see that and infuriated to see that in this comic book.
Yeah.
Wow.
How dare they?
Yeah.
How dare they know my feelings? Yeah.
Yeah. My hugs are always pure of heart.
They really are. I'll give you that. They feel nice.
No. Yeah.
I come from Hawaii. That's how we say hello. I'm numb to it. Completely numb to it.
So it's nice. Everyone got something from this. Everyone seems to like it. Should we just jump into some final thoughts? Chris, since you started us off, you want to start us with this?
Yeah, I'm going to read volume 3.
Yeah.
And I think that is kind of all I need. I've said all I need to say. I actually am going to read volume 3. And now it's just, do I skip ahead and read volume 3 or wait for someone to recommend it on the podcast?
Yeah, that's true. You don't have time to read volume 3 without it being recommended. You know that.
Mm-hmm.
And Deb, what are your final thoughts?
I must say, like, I tend to read fast, and this is a very visually very light book, right? But if you speed through it, you miss a lot. And what I love about talking about this book with you guys is you force me to slow down and re-examine what I'm seeing and realize the level of craft that is maybe not obvious on a first read. The level of craft of writing, the level of craft in visual storytelling, the level of craft in the character development. It makes me appreciate this book so much more. I do want to keep reading it, even though it's not like an easy melodrama. And it's not a horny book.
Yeah.
No.
And it's not exactly super romantic either. It's just kind of like this interesting drama.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But it doesn't make you go like, oh, I wish I was in love. Or it doesn't make you go like, wow, I wish I was getting some. It's kind of like, oh, these are people.
Yeah.
Kind of making their way through a difficult situation. And I like that I don't know what's going to happen.
It's funny. It's funny you talk about the idea of kind of normally just reading books like this fast, because that's the one thing with comics. Like with when we consume like TV or movies or music, like you're set at a time. Like you, I mean, I know some people that like watch shows on 1.5 speed, which is crazy as far as I'm concerned. But like you're locked into what the creator has determined the length should be and has to be for a scene, like a pause or someone doing something fast or slow. Like that's the same for all of us when we're consuming media, except for maybe ADHD tendencies that kind of have you bouncing around. And with novels, you can read straight through, fast or slow, but there's a limit to like how fast, really.
Yeah.
With comics, someone could just really speed read something like super quick, or you could like pour over it for an hour a page, which you can't do with a novel. Yeah, it's a very specific thing. I know it sounds. You know, I often think about this in terms of like producing pages, how much time goes into a page and how quickly people will read it. But it's nice knowing that there's the high reread factor, especially with something like this, where I did go through it. And then I went back and I reread it because I could. I wouldn't do that with a novel, but because of this, it can slow down on the next read through.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know where I'm going with this, except to say that comics is a very distinct medium that can benefit a reader and also ruin a reader.
Yeah,
ruin an author.
And an author.
I won't say which author, but they were at a book launch event, and it was like the actual launch for their book, let's say in the young adult space. And so people were like buying the book and then getting in line. And I think the fifth or sixth person in line got to the front and was like, I just read it in line. It's my favorite book. And the author was like, internally, like, this took me 2 years. Like, this is 2 years of my life. And you read it in the line waiting to get me to sign it. Like, they just pounded through it to just like absorb it as quickly as they could. And they're like, and they felt like in the moment, like literally destroyed. Like I did 2 years and someone read this book in 8 minutes.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they also know that young person is going to read that book 100 more times. So it's also like, it's not really about the length of time. It's maybe about how it stays with you and how many times you go to read back. But as an author, it can be profoundly discouraging to hear, oh, I read it so quickly because I loved it. And it's like, yeah.
No, I mean, the way I've kind of fixed that in my head, because it happens a lot, obviously, especially with like single issues, I multiply by the number of people that are having that experience.
Oh, okay.
So when knowing someone is reading like a Batman comic or whatever in like 5-10 minutes, I'm like, well, they're not getting the full thing by doing that. But all right, well, maybe like 70,000 people read that, and it all took them 5 to 10 minutes. Like, that's a lot of time. I have taken up so much time of people in the world, and I'm so proud of it.
That's a great way to look at it.
That actually is a really, really good way to work at it. I like
Super
that.
healthy. I got a lot of great coping mechanisms. All right, so went off the rails there. David, what's your final thought? Don't you try and co-host, Chris. I saw you trying to get in there. I know what I'm doing.
And did he interrupt your intro as well?
Yeah.
Control. So I am an author's dream, I think, because I'm one of those read one page for 20 minutes guys. So my final thought is, on page 1, I was with the portrait of Ayano. I was like, oh, right, this author can really draw. Like, it's going to be one of those. And this is like a very like classically like manga looking portrait of this lady, but like it has so much life and like, I don't know, it's a good drawing, let's say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then on the very last page of the book is an author's note, which is also really good, which I love, where she's like, yeah, I thought I was going to have a good year, and then I immediately got sick, and here's how I got better. And there are so many of these like types of author's notes in manga that it's kind of sad, actually. But this was a good one. Like, she has such a good sense of humor and good like caricature of herself, to where I opened the book and I was like, this is great drawing. And as I was closing the book, I was like, oh, this is also very funny. So thank you for making us read volume 2.
My pleasure. And my final thought is, it was my pleasure. So yeah, even though we're adults, volume 2, we are going to have some commercials, probably selling you some really important things, and we'll be right back.
When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Baker's, where you'll find over 30,000 mouth-watering choices that excite your inner foodie. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices, plus extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week. You can also save up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with fuel points. More savings and more inspiring flavors make shopping Baker's worth it every time. Baker's, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply. When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Baker's, where you'll find over 30,000 mouth-watering choices that excite your inner foodie. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices, plus extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week. You can also save up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with fuel points. More savings and more inspiring flavors make shopping Baker's worth it every time. Baker's, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
And we're back. And this week, we're going to open up the Mangasplaining mailbag. And I believe our postal carrier, Christopher Woodrow Butcher, in his cute little postal office, has a letter, an email, a missive for us.
Well, this one comes direct to us from Australia and the old emails, which is, I think, contact@mangasplaining.com. I don't know. It's in the notes. And it is from Michelle Bald. She says, "Hi, everyone. I'm one of your Australian listeners, and I found this podcast on Spotify in October. Listening to the podcast has really helped me work through a tough spot." Very nice. Thank you. My question is regards to the industry of publication translation. Other than knowing the language to translate from, what other qualifications would translators need in the publishing industry? Many thanks again. Loving each episode, Michelle. So I thought this would be a good one, because I know that David looks for different kinds of translators, or works with lots of different translators that have different strengths when he's working on different properties for Viz. And Deb, you worked in the manga translation battle where you were judging manga translations, different translations for a while. Could you maybe explain a little bit about what that's about first? Because I think that's a really interesting thing that not many people know about.
Oh, that was something that was funded by the Digital Comics Association of Japan.
Mm.
And I think it was the Japanese government, also Culture and Arts funded it as well, where we would get 3 different manga, previously untranslated manga from different publishers. And then we would put a chapter up and challenge people around the world to give their shot at translating it. And what was interesting about that is that several of the people who have won have gone on to professional careers, which is really fantastic. Like, for example, one of the prizes of the contest was that if you were the winner for translating a particular manga, you actually got the contract to translate that manga.
Oh, cool.
The Digital Comics Association would underwrite the cost of the translation for whoever the publisher might be. The New York Boys Love manga.
Oh, that Yen's
Yen
doing.
Press. That was formerly a manga translation battle title. And then they reached out to me about a year ago saying, hey, do you know how to get in touch with that guy who won? Which, I'm sorry, I'll put in the show notes. I did meet him at the ceremony, and he did get the gig to translate that 2 omnibus volume Boys Love series.
Awesome.
I guess, like, it was something that I co-judged with some people who are actually professional translators and bilingual people. And then what I was kind of looking for is kind of similar to my work, because I work in user experience content, that you look for voice and tone. And the other goal is to get a translation that gives an English reader the same experience, the same feelings, the same impressions that a Japanese reader would get. Now, that may not necessarily be a literal word-to-word translation, right? Like sometimes you make localization choices, or sometimes like people struggle with trying to mimic what's being implied by a Kansai accent, for example, right? What's being implied by what the equivalent of like a Shakespearean accent in something from Edo era Japan.
Yeah.
People struggle with that because there are nuances to Japanese language that are conveyed through words that are hard to convey in English. But mostly what you're looking for is a seamless kind of just like, it just flows, right? Like you can just read it, enjoy it. You're getting the same feelings, the same vibe as a Japanese reader. And good translation, like good design, to me, should be pretty much invisible. It should just feel right. It just should feel like we were talking about, if you know, our adults, like, these are people talking. And maybe there's little nuances in how the mother talks, and there's little nuances in how the guy about Wataru talks. And they shouldn't all sound like the same person. And there's different voice and tone, and like depending on how whether they're being super frosty and polite, or they're being really familiar, or
very passive aggressive, as they were this episode, even though we're adults.
So these are all very subtle things. And with manga's translation, the other aspect of that of complication is, can it fit in a word balloon?
Yeah.
And a lot of the Japanese word balloons are tall and thin, which means certain long words are, even though you might want to use a long word, will not fit. Or trying to explain something like what they can express in 10 characters in Japanese requires several words in English, and you just won't fit in a goddamn bubble.
Yeah.
So there's all kinds of trade-offs with translation. But I would say the number one tip, to bring it back to the question, is besides having a mastery of the language and the culture, you just need to be a good writer in the target language.
Deb stole my only answer with her last sentence.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
No,
that was
good.
my follow-up too. Yeah.
I think what you're saying is pretty much on target, because even though we're adults, for instance, Casey Lucas is credited for adaptation and Jocelyn Allen for translation. And I'd be curious what the differences between the two were on this project, kind of like what Casey brought to it and what Jocelyn brought to it.
No.
Because if you give 6 people the same thing to translate, you're going to get 6 different things.
Yeah.
Because translation is not a direct one-to-one thing. Like, you have to be able to interpret as you translate it in a lot of ways, for fiction especially. So the thing about being a writer, I really kind of zeroed in on as I was kind of learning about hiring translators and things like that. Because if you're already used to solving these kinds of problems, like dialogue problems, it's maybe easier, or maybe a different process to solve it in your native language then. I don't know if that makes sense, but I feel like the more experience you have writing, the better the translations end up being in the end.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jocelyn said the same thing, is that and she's got a lot of philosophy about it, so I don't want to overly simplify. I'll link to an actual interview that she gave where she, goes on it to talk about it more at length. But yeah, translation is writing. Like, the best translators not only know the language that they're translating from, like Michelle's saying, like, what do you need in addition, but also understand the cultural bits of, like, you can understand what someone's, actually saying, but if you don't understand the culture that it comes from, you maybe don't understand the meaning of it. And then beyond that, being able to write convincingly or interestingly, down to little individual word choices, like David noticing supper instead of dinner to describe evening meal. And that could mark a different thing. And supper's like a less formal than dinner is. And like, was that used? What was the Japanese word there? Did Jocelyn and Casey choose supper specifically because they said, let's get a meal rather than like, let's specifically get like formal dinner? Like, what? All of those things, like, we're not going to know as readers of the translated work.
Well, maybe they meant, let's get a bite to eat before we go out in our fishing boats.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Chip learned something today.
Yay!
Yeah, the best translators, I think, are writers themselves. And I actually also think the thing I was most interested about is, David, you're, unlike a lot of editors, I think your projects are all over the place. Like, you do really different projects from project to project, or you'll be working on like 4 or 5 things at the same time that have very different like tones or styles or audiences. Like, everything from like shonen battle manga to things with like really heavy accents to more technical writing when you're doing like art books and stuff like that, where it has to be a more formal or less conversational kind of speech. For you, is it about finding the right translator, or is it like someone's assigned and it's working with them to pull them into the space that the project needs?
It's both. It's hiring someone. Like, I choose all my translators and that kind of thing. This I have been since I think my very first project at Viz, which was like a babysitting kind of job. But when I'm choosing a translator, I do want to pull them into the project, like have a certain tone or that kind of thing, or pull them into like the tone of the project, I should say.
Yeah.
And that's, an opening email is like, hey, here's kind of what I'm going for. Here's kind of the tone I'm looking for. But also here's where you can bring some creativity to it, like bring your own voice or mark or, experience, essentially. Because even though, I said like being a writer is great for being a translator, if you're not a great writer, there's other ways to compensate. Like, for what I do, essentially, a translator gives me a script. I punch it up in like Hollywood terms and then pass it on to a letterer. They lay it out, and then we do all the copy editing and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So if you give me a script, you're like, I'm not very strong at this kind of dialogue, but here's all the info you need to figure out exactly what context I'm translating here to see if I made the right decision or to help get me into the right ballpark. That's amazing. Like, that's just as good as being a great writer, I think. Because then, I have enough information to hopefully make an intelligent decision. And getting both is like a blessing.
I can't speak specifically to this book that we read today, but that's generally what adaptation is. Like, if there's not a strong editor on a project who's doing like a heavy punch-up kind of editing pass, like Seven Seas, who published Even Though We're Adults, and then Viz have very different editorial sort of, situations going on, that like an adapter will be like, a translator will be like, here's everything you need to know about what they said. Here's what I think you should go with, but as like the final word, like, make your decision as like the adapting writer. And I think that's like, there's so many different ways to do this. The last thing I want to add is one of the projects we did at Mangasplaining Extra was Ken Nimura's short story. And it is a short story that has so much cultural context that, like, he's Spanish-Japanese and he expresses himself generally when he's thinking, he thinks in Spanish, but he also is fluent in English and fluent in Japanese. And so he wrote this story, translated himself into Japanese from the Spanish, and like, it's a great Japanese story. And it's about 3 people, 2 Spanish dudes and a Japanese dude, doing this like ancient 12th century Spanish like performance in the streets of Tokyo. And we're trying to translate all of this with the cultural context of it around it. And he was just like, here's what it means, but I'm not trying to translate this into English. He knows English and he wrote the story, but he knows that his English isn't necessarily at the level that he wants that to be the final product. He wants someone who's like an English writer or an English editor or an English adaptation person to like turn the story into something that really flows and feels good and communicates all of the nuance and the ideas that he wants in the story in their native language as an editor. So I know that Andrew worked really closely with them, and there was like tons of back and forth at the lettering stage, because I lettered that one. I went back and I was like, yeah, a couple of these words are a little long. Can we say something like this? Does this still communicate what it needs to communicate? And it was a really interesting process to speak to someone where you could show them the English you had written and they said, yeah, that's it, but couldn't necessarily easily generate it themselves. And that's like, you can know the language, but if you don't know the language to the degree that you want to know the language, it doesn't matter. You know what I mean? Like, it's going to be a poor translation or a stiff translation or a robotic translation. And working with someone is one way to do that. Studying harder is one way to do that. Hiring somebody because you don't want to do those two things, you just want to be pounding out comics pages as quick as you can, is another way to do that. And I think that's an amazing thing that I'm really fortunate to have gotten to do that. Yeah, I'll see if we can rope in Jocelyn and Co, because they're both in Japan right now where I am.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
And just to get like a quick snippet to talk about that, or if they've got an interview where they talked about it, we can link it in the show notes. I think that'd be really fun.
I've got
it's
real life
such a big
example
question.
too.
Oh, really?
The project I mentioned where I was babysitting, which is totally the wrong word. It was like a training wheels project. It was like, here's a bunch of pros, rookie editor, don't mess this up too bad.
Oh, they were babysitting you.
Oh.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Exactly, actually. But it was called Record of Grandcrest War. It was written by the Record of Lodoss War, the writer from there back then. And it's like high fantasy, like elves and stuff. And if you've listened to literally any episode of Mangasplaining, I am very much like a 1950s, 60s trench coat and cigarettes guy.
Yeah.
Way out of my wheelhouse. But we had an adapter, a rewriter on the book, a guy by the name of Stan, who knows fantasy. Like, he can do the voice without it sounding like doing a voice. And that was a real like helpful thing. It was actually a great education on kind of like the different challenges you can meet in localization. So yeah. Really cool.
There's definitely all kinds of, like, I think like Mark Simmons, he specializes in Gundam translation for Gundam stuff.
Oh, that's brilliant, actually.
Which basically has a whole arcane vocabulary and backgrounder. And if you don't mind your P's and Q's with Gundam, people are going to let you know. So it's an interesting little niche, right?
Mm-hmm.
To better understand the challenges of translating Japanese. Did you see the Duolingo Japan video, the Museum of Wonky English?
No.
No.
Oh, it's hilarious. They set up this museum in Harajuku with all these examples of really weird, wonky Japanese translated English. And one is they had a coffee pot, an empty coffee pot, and it said, let me get this. I had it. It says, when coffee is gone, it's over.
Yeah.
And then you show the Japanese, and what the Japanese actually says is, when you are out of instant coffee packets, we will not replenish them.
Yeah, same difference.
Like in your hotel room.
In your hotel room.
Close.
When the coffee is gone, it is over.
It is over.
And then there was another one. It's
man.
like, please urinate with precision and elegance.
Yes.
I like that one, actually.
Actually, I like that one a lot too.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
That was actually better than the Japanese. I thought, au contraire, that is not wonky at all. In fact, all English guys should say that.
Yeah. That's just fancy.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Chip, would you ever hire someone to be like, to help you with a script like that? Like if you were doing like a fantasy story or something?
I would probably hire you for some like 50s, 60s hard-boiled slang. Like I believe in a text earlier this week, David used the word cockamamie.
Yeah, it's true. Kind of a fuddy-duddy at heart, but what can you do?
Yeah, exactly.
You're an old soul, David.
I really am. It's like getting weird as I get older.
Cockamamie's pretty good.
Good question, Chris. Way to go.
Well, good question, Michelle. Thank you, Michelle, for sending in a question. If you have questions for Mangasplaining, please send them in. We'll actually answer them this season, I swear. We're going for shorter episodes, so we'll always have time. We'll see how it goes. Yeah, thanks so much.
Well, that's an episode of Mangasplaining, just like previous episodes, but this one was a bit different. I'm Chip. I never host. This is me hosting. Thank you. Goodbye. This has been Mangasplaining, episode 86, Even Though We're Adults, volume 2, by Takako Shimura. Thanks for listening. For our next episode, we'll be reading Rose of Versailles, volume 1, by Ryoko Ikeda. Want to pick up a copy? Please consider supporting your local comic book or manga specialty shop. Find one near you at comicshoplocator.com. Or check out your local library for print and digital lending options. You can also follow along with our complete reading list at mangasplaining.com. And don't forget to check out our newsletter and publishing endeavor at mangasplainingextra.com. Thanks to DADS for their musical accompaniment this episode.
Grand Canyon University, an affordable private Christian university, is one of the largest and fastest growing universities in the country, offering more than 270 programs online. In addition to federal grants and aid, GCU's online students received nearly $130 million in institutional scholarships in 2022. Find your purpose at Grand Canyon University. Private, Christian, affordable. Visit gcu.edu/myoffer to see the scholarships you may qualify for.